So then Ford said to Burroughs, let's go car camping. And the next year, they went car camping. And it was a tremendous success. And so Ford decided that every year, he and Burroughs were going to take a big trip to a different part of the country, down to Florida or the Smoky Mountains or the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. But this time, Ford said, I'd like to bring two of my friends. One of them is Thomas Edison, and the other one is Harvey Firestone, the tire magnate. So this is not a great picture, but it's a great picture of the car. But that's Ford behind the wheel, it's Burroughs to his right, and that's Edison in the background. So you have three captains of industry and one naturalist. Here are three of them. I didn't have Firestone in this picture, but Ford's on the right, Edison's on the left, Burroughs looks like the Lorax in a three-piece suit. You can't miss him. But the question, I'm fascinated by this story. They called themselves the Vagabonds. They weren't exactly roughing it. Edison brought a battery to illuminate the tent. Ford brought servants. They had a gigantic dining room table with a lazy Susan. But they were out in nature. And the question that really interests me is who was co-opting whom? I mean, because on the one hand, Ford was a marketing genius. He brought along newsreel men to take pictures of everything. He arranged crowds to meet them at their stops, and there were many, many articles, and they had foot races and wood chopping competitions, and basically he was using Burroughs, who was hugely famous, to advertise the car and car camping. But at the same time, something else was happening. Every morning, Edison, who loved flowers, would gather an armful of wildflowers and bring them to Burroughs to be identified. And Burroughs had an encyclopedic knowledge of the natural world. And every day, Ford would ask Burroughs about birds. And under Burroughs' influence, Ford lent his support to the Migratory Bird Act of 1918, which was a very important piece of legislation. And Ford began to buy some land for conservation, including Burroughs' home farm, where he'd grown up. And that was part of the courtship of Burroughs, but at the same time, that place is now a wonderful education center and a beautiful spot to see birds. So I am glad it exists. And the truth is, these men influenced each other. It is a complex relationship that we still live inside of. And we live more than ever in a world where we really can't afford to be purists. We are kind of like this nest, which is made out of twigs and newspapers. Newspapers, of course, a nearly extinct form of communication, but we really weave our worlds out of the natural and the artificial. Our human-made parks hold wild birds and absolutely real trees, but our natural places host visitors who come by car, and they come by plane, and they're often managed in ways that are technological and artificial. We are partners, whether we like it or not, with a host of contradictory forces. And for me, bird watching itself really embodies a very beautiful paradox. On the one hand, I began by referring to a book group. It's a very bookish thing to do. You go out in the woods and you literally bring a guidebook. You have a book in your pocket. And you are drawing these wild birds into your world, the library world, the world of classification and scientific nomenclature. You're naming them. That's a cerulean warbler, and it has a Latin name too. But at the same time that you are doing that and drawing the bird into your world, the bird is luring you farther and farther out into its world. And pretty soon I wasn't just in Central Park, but I wanted to go to those other places where those birds were. And so you also see the bird, to my mind, when you bird watch in two ways. Again, that double vision. On the one hand, you see the known, named, quantified, counted bird, but at the same time, you have to really see it and recognize it as this mysterious wild animal that lives beyond our ability to ever wholly know or name it, and whose fate is strangely bound up with our own in ways we're not even sure about. And I want to end now just with this last slide. This is another one of those neotropical migrants. It's a warbler, bird you can see in Central Park, and it's called an ovenbird. There's a fantastic poem by Robert Frost called The Ovenbird. which I knew long before I had ever encountered this actual bird. And one of the things about, it's a very elegiac poem. If I had time, it's not very long, I would read it to you. I don't, but I hope you all go home and Google the ovenbird and read the poem, because it's a wonderful poem. One of the lines in the poem is, the bird seems almost to be speaking in the poem, and it says, the highway dust is over all. And that poem was actually written around the time that Burroughs received his car from Ford, even earlier, the first decade of the 20th century. So just when the car was being mass-produced, already there was a sense of the highway dust over all. We have lived inside of this world of diminishment for a long time. As Burroughs understood after the Civil War, that's why he was so popular. The Industrial Revolution came along, the railway knit everything together, the frontier not only closed, we had turned back on ourselves and we're starting to consume our own country. And the last lines of this poem are very, very haunting. It's the bird all but speaking. The question that he frames in all but words is what to make of a diminished thing. And I think that question about diminishment is obviously a very, very haunting one. What does it mean? Is it environmental? Is it theological? Is it mythological? Are we diminished, demoted by Darwin to mere primates? Is the natural world no longer an unknown frontier, the diminished thing? It is obviously all of these things and more, and maybe less than all of these things together. But for me, bird watching has been a partial answer to the question, what to make of a diminished thing, which is to say, you look at it, and you learn about it, and you wonder at it, and you try to save it. And another answer, of course, is that you love it. Because, at least as far as I'm concerned, we really only can save what we love, which is why I love hearing about all these local encounters with nature that earlier speakers here have mentioned. And that extends to ourselves, because we are part of the natural world too, and it extends to cities, which are quintessential human creations, and which, by the way, are potentially greener than a lot of other places you might live. But what we can't do is give up in despair. Even though, there are always someone's always removing the top of a mountain. The environmental news can always be bad. But I think we have to recognize that our own backyard, diminished as it may be, is a fine and legitimate place to begin, as long as we hold in our minds those sister regions linked to our waterways and our parks, and we don't trick ourselves into thinking that our islands of nature are self-sustaining, because ultimately they're not. They need us, and they need other distant regions that we have to have the imagination to encounter. So what to make of a diminished thing? Our answers will undoubtedly change over time. For me, the most important thing is that we not stop asking the question, because it is a question that we do all have to answer as individuals, as a community, as a civilization. And it is a question that people like Wendy Paulson and organizations like Openlands answer every day, for which I am very grateful. Thank you.